The snow had barely begun to fall when retired Ranger Thomas Hale stepped onto his back porch to collect firewood, but the old German shepherd waiting for him wasn't supposed to be there. Rex had wandered off 3 days earlier, disappearing into the forest without a trace. Thomas had searched until his legs gave out, calling the dog's name until his lungs burned. But now Rex was back, except something was wrong. The shepherd's fur was matted with ice, his paws torn, his breathing strained, and his eyes, usually calm, warm, and steady, were wide with urgency. Rex wasn't just returning home. He was summoning Thomas, pacing backward toward the tree line, glancing over his shoulder again and again as if begging the old man to follow. Thomas's pulse quickened. "What is it, boy?" Rex let out a low, trembling bark and took off toward the woods. Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, his flashlight, and followed the dog he had raised since puppyhood into the dark, freezing forest, unaware that Rex was leading him to something buried beneath the snow, something the storm had tried to hide, something that would stop Thomas in his tracks and change the rest of his winter and maybe the rest of his life, because deep in those woods, waiting in the cold, was the last thing Thomas ever expected to find. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more emotional, heart-stirring stories about loyalty, courage, and the bonds that refuse to break, no matter how many winters pass. Thomas Hale was stacking the last pieces of firewood beside the porch when he heard the crunch of paws in the snow behind him. For a split second, he dismissed the sound as a deer or maybe the neighbor's stray mutt, but then he felt it, a familiar presence, the same quiet gravity that had lived by his side for nearly 14 years. He turned, and the world seemed to tilt. Rex stood at the edge of the tree line, trembling, exhausted, covered in frost. His once strong frame sagged under the weight of whatever he had walked through. Snow clung to his legs in heavy clumps, and dry blood stained the fur around his paws. His breath came in shallow, desperate bursts. "Rex," Thomas whispered, the word barely escaping him. The old German shepherd lifted his head at the sound of his name, but there was no relief in his eyes, only urgency and fear. Thomas stepped forward, but the dog took a single step back into the trees, letting out a strained bark, a bark that didn't ask for help, but demanded it. It was the same bark Rex had used only twice in his entire life. The first time was the winter Thomas's wife had collapsed in their kitchen. The second was the night Thomas had found his brother lying unconscious on the barn floor. Both times, that bark had meant one thing: follow me, now. Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. "What happened to you, boy?" Rex didn't wait for an answer. He turned around and limped deeper into the woods. Thomas grabbed his coat off the porch railing, shoved his arms through the sleeves, and followed the shepherd without stopping to think. Snowflakes swirled against his face as he stepped into the forest, the cold biting harder the farther he went. Rex's tracks were uneven, sometimes dragging, sometimes missing entirely, but the dog moved with purpose, pushing through the underbrush as if time were slipping away. Branches cracked under Thomas's boots as he hurried after him. "Rex, slow down. You're hurt." The shepherd didn't slow. If anything, the urgency in his movements sharpened. He kept glancing back, checking whether Thomas was still behind him, his eyes flashing with a mixture of desperation and determination. Something was out there. Something Rex needed him to see. Something Rex had risked freezing to death to lead him to. For the first time in years, Thomas felt the old ranger instincts kicking back to life. His breath deepened, his senses sharpened in the forest, usually so still and familiar, felt alive with tension. The snowfall grew heavier, blanketing the world in white. Visibility shrank. The trees pressed closer. Rex's tail brushed the snow as he limped ahead, his body shaking from exertion. Thomas pushed forward, climbing over fallen logs, ducking under branches, following the faint beam of his flashlight to the darkening woods. Then, suddenly, Rex stopped. Completely. His body stiffened, ears perked, breath quivering. Thomas approached carefully, his boots crunching softly in the snow. "What is it, boy?" Rex looked back at him one last time, a look filled with pain, pleading, and something deeper, something heartbreaking. Then he stepped aside, and Thomas saw it. A shape beneath the snow. Small, still, a flash of fabric. A hand. A child's hand. Thomas staggered backward, his pulse exploding in his ears. Oh, God! Rex sank beside the small mound, whimpering softly, nudging the frozen sleeve with his nose as if urging the child to wake. Thomas froze where he stood, breath lost, knees weakening. Because Rex hadn't just come home. He had brought Thomas to a child alone in the woods, a child who hadn't moved in a long time. And Thomas had no idea if it was too late, or if his child still had one last breath left to save. For several seconds, Thomas couldn't move. The shock rooted him to ground as the wind howled between the trees, carrying flecks of snow across the small, still form buried beneath it. The child looked impossibly fragile, half covered in frost. Fingers curled toward his palm, face turned slightly away as if the forest itself were trying to shield him from the cold. Rex nudged the child's shoulder again, whining louder this time. His tail thumped weakly, pleading for Thomas to do something. Anything. Thomas forced himself forward, dropping to his knees with a painful grunt. His hand shook as he brushed snow off the child's jacket, revealing a thin, worn coat soaked through from the storm. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, maybe younger. His cheeks were pale, lips tinged blue. Come on, kid," Thomas murmured, pressing trembling fingers to the boy's neck. "Don't let it be too late." Rex leaned close, whimpering with every second that passed. Thomas held his breath. Then, a pulse. Faint, weak, barely there, but real. "Oh, thank God!" Thomas exhaled, a wave of relief crashing through him so fast it made his eyes burn. "He's alive." Rex let out a broken bark, a sound of desperate hope, and nuzzled the boy's cheek. But relief turned quickly into fear. The boy's pulse was shallow, thready, fading. His breaths were almost non-existent. If the cold didn't take him in minutes, shock would. Thomas had seen it before, hypothermia stealing the last bit of warmth from a body until even life itself froze. He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the boy, tucking the fabric tight. "Stay with me, kid. Stay with me." The boy didn't react. Thomas slid his arms beneath the child, lifting him gently. The boy weighed almost nothing, a terrifying sign. Rex pressed against Thomas's leg, ready to follow, his injured paws sinking into the snow. "This won't be easy," Thomas muttered to the dog, securing the child against his chest. "But we're getting him out." The hike back felt twice as long. The storm thickened, swirling around them in icy gusts. Thomas shielded the boy's face with his hand as he trudged forward, each step heavier than the last. His legs screamed in protest, old injuries flaring, but he refused to slow down. "Come on, Thomas," he muttered to himself. One foot, then the other. Rex limped beside him, refusing to fall behind despite the pain in his torn paws. Every so often the dog glanced up at Thomas, as if checking that the child was still breathing. Halfway through the woods, the boy stirred. Barely. A faint cough, more like a small gasp, escaped his lips. Thomas tightened his grip instinctively. "That's it," he whispered. "Keep fighting." But the boy's eyes remained closed, his body limp against Thomas's chest. By the time the cabin came into view, Thomas was shaking from exertion. The porch light glowed faintly through the veil of snow, a warm beacon in the freezing dark. "We made it," Thomas said breathlessly. "We're almost there." Rex collapsed onto the porch as soon as they reached it, panting from pain and exhaustion. Thomas didn't have the luxury to rest. He kicked the door open, hurried inside, and laid the child on the couch closest to the fireplace. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around them immediately. Thomas grabbed blankets, towels, anything that could help. He removed the boy's soaked clothes carefully, leaving him in dry layers, rubbing his arms and legs to restore circulation. "Come on, kid. Fight. Don't give up on me." Rex dragged himself inside, curling up beside the couch, refusing to be separated from the child for even a second. Minutes passed, long, painful minutes. Then, just as Thomas was beginning to fear the boy had slipped away, a small, fragile voice cracked through the silence. "W, where am I?" Thomas froze. Rex shot upright, tail thumping faintly. The boy's eyes opened for the first time, clouded with confusion and fear. And Thomas Hale realized this was only the beginning. The cabin was warm, but the boy shivered uncontrollably as he blinked around the room with unfocused eyes. His breath came out sharp and shallow, like each inhale hurt. Thomas kept a steady hand on the blanket, wrapped around him, but didn't touch him otherwise. The kid looked like someone who hadn't felt safe in a very long time. Rex lay pressed against the couch, his old body trembling, tail tapping weakly whenever the boy moved. The shepherd didn't look away from the child even once. "Easy," Thomas said softly, kneeling beside the couch. "You're safe now. You're in my cabin. My name's Thomas." The boy looked at him as though he were trying to understand the meaning of each word one by one. His lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Finally, his voice emerged, small, hoarse, barely there. "RX, he brought you." Thomas's heart clenched. The boy remembered the dog. That was a good sign. "That's right," Thomas said. "He came to get me. He saved your life." The boy reached a weak hand toward Rex. The shepherd lifted his head and nudged the child's fingers gently, exhaling a soft whine. The boy gave a faint smile, frail but real. Then his eyes rolled slightly, dizzy with exhaustion. "Hey, stay with me." Thomas leaned closer. "Can you tell me your name?" Silence stretched. The boy's brows furrowed, confusion clouding his face. I don't know." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "You don't remember?" The boy shook his head, a tiny, frightened movement. "Okay," Thomas said gently. "Don't force it. What's the last thing you do remember?" The boy closed his eyes, searching inside a fog. His breathing quickened. I was in the woods," he whispered. "It was cold. I was running, I think, or hiding." Thomas kept his voice steady. "Hiding from what?" The boy's entire body tensed. His fingers dug into the blanket. Rex let out a deep, protective rumble. Thomas's pulse kicked. Something, or someone, had driven this boy into the forest. And whatever it was, the fear hadn't faded from him yet. "Hey," Thomas said softly. "You're all right here. Nothing can get you now." The boy opened his eyes slowly, but the fear didn't go away. If anything, it sharpened. "I heard voices," he whispered. "Men. They were angry." Thomas froze. "Did they hurt you?" he asked. The boy hesitated. "I don't know. I remember running. Someone yelling my name." He paused. "No, yelling a name. I'm not sure it was mine." Thomas's mind churned. A missing child? A runaway? Something worse? He would have to call the sheriff. But not tonight. The boy needed stability before anything else. He was shaking badly, trauma mixing with cold. Thomas tucked the blanket more tightly around him. "You're safe here," he repeated. "No one's going to hurt you. Not while I'm around." The boy breathed shallowly but nodded. Rex lifted his head and placed it gently on the boy's arm, as if promising the same. The boy looked at Rex with a strange blend of awe and gratitude. "He found me," he whispered. "I remember that." Thomas nodded. "He led me to you. I wouldn't have found you without him." The boy's eyes softened. "He didn't leave me, not even when I fell." Thomas felt something warm bloom painfully in his chest. That was Rex, always loyal, even when it hurt him. Even now, the shepherd was trembling with exhaustion, but he refused to move away from the boy's side. "I need to check your temperature," Thomas said. "You were outside a long time." The boy didn't resist, though his expression tightened with nerves. Thomas moved slowly, careful not to startle him. The boy's skin was icy to the touch, his lips still bluish. He was fighting hard, but he wasn't stable yet. "We'll need to get you warmed up properly," Thomas murmured. "And hydrated." The boy swallowed. "Am I going to die?" Thomas's throat tightened. "No, not on my watch." The boy trembled, not from cold this time, but from tears trying to escape. He squeezed his eyes shut, biting back a sob. Thomas pretended not to notice, giving him space. "What happened to you out there?" Thomas asked gently. "How did you end up alone?" The boy shook his head. I don't want, I can't." Thomas raised a hand. It's all right. You don't have to talk about it right now. The boy opened his eyes again, and for the first time, Thomas saw something other than fear in them. Trust. Fragile, trembling trust. Then something unexpected happened. He reached out, not for Thomas, for Rex. The old shepherd lifted himself just enough to nuzzle into the boy's chest. The child buried his fingers in the dog's fur, clinging to him like an anchor in a storm. Thomas watched them quietly, heart twisting. Rex, who had no business trekking through a snowstorm at his age, had carried this boy's life in his mouth like something sacred. And the child responded to him like Rex was the only solid thing in a world made of shadows. "Rex," the boy whispered, "don't leave me." Rex let out a soft, exhausted breath, a promise in the form of a sigh. Thomas stood slowly and walked to a window. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the forest. But the peaceful scene didn't calm him. Someone had chased this child. Someone had driven him into the cold. Someone who might still be out there. And if they came looking, Thomas would have to protect them both. A lost boy with no memory and an old dog who had already given everything he had. He took a long breath and looked back at them. Child and dog curled together on the couch. Whatever storm was coming next, Thomas was already in it. The next morning came slowly, the kind of quiet winter dawn that made the world look softer than it really was. Pale sunlight touched the tops of the trees, stretching long shadows across the clearing. Inside the cabin, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. He hadn't slept, not even a little. The boy was still asleep on the couch, curled against Rex's side. The shepherd hadn't moved all night, as if he feared the boy might vanish the moment he closed his eyes. Thomas watched them both with a heavy ache in his chest. Something about the way they clung to each other unsettled him. Not in a bad way, but in a way that whispered danger. Something had bound the two of them together in the woods. Something cold, something violent. Thomas set the mug down and glanced toward the window. The snowfall had stopped, but the sky hung low and gray, waiting. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked to the door. If someone had chased that boy, Thomas needed to know how close danger was. He stepped outside quietly so he wouldn't wake the child. The cold bit at his cheeks as he stepped off the porch and into the snow-covered clearing. It didn't take long before he found them. Tracks. Not just the boys. Not just Rex's. Boot prints. 3 different sets. Thomas crouched beside them, examining the depth and direction. They weren't old. Maybe 12 hours. Maybe less. The storm had preserved them, freezing them into the earth like warnings. The prints circled the clearing, then stopped. Stopped right where Rex had emerged from the woods a night before. A chill ran through Thomas deeper than the cold. Someone was here, he murmured to himself. More than one. And whoever they were, they stopped searching, because they thought the boy didn't survive the storm. Or because they didn't need him alive. Thomas straightened slowly, tension locking his shoulders. This wasn't random. The boy didn't just get lost. He didn't just run. He had been chased, cornered, hunted, and by the look of the prints, by people who knew how to move through the woods. Thomas's instincts roared awake, the old ranger in him sharpening like a blade. He followed the tracks deeper into the trees, careful, quiet, alert. The forest felt wrong, too still, too silent, holding its breath. He traced the prints for another 50 yards before they vanished into a patch of churned snow where something heavy had been dragged. A faint dread crept up his spine. Bodies left drag marks. Supplies left drag marks. But so did kids trying to escape. He crouched again, pressed his fingers into the snow, and felt the cold seep into his skin. The shape told a story. The boy had stumbled, fallen, crawled. Then Rex's paw prints appeared beside it. Thomas closed his eyes. Rex hadn't just found the boy. He had protected him from men who might still be in the forest. A crack sounded behind him, a branch snapping under weight. Thomas froze. For a moment he didn't breathe. Then he slowly turned his head. Nothing moved, not even the wind. Still he felt watched. A pressure in the air. A presence. He backed away carefully, following his own boot prints back toward the cabin. Every instinct screamed at him to hurry, but he forced himself to move steady, quiet, controlled. predators, animals, or human, reacted to weakness and panic. When he reached the clearing again, he saw movement through the window. The boy was awake, sitting up slowly, Rex nudging his shoulder anxiously. Thomas exhaled shakily and walked inside. The boy looked at him with wide, questioning eyes. Where did you go?" Thomas shut the door and slid the bolt into place. "Just checking something." The boy hugged his knees. "Are they coming?" Thomas's heart stuttered. "Who?" The boy swallowed hard. "The men who were yelling." Rex pressed closer to him, growling under his breath, not at Thomas, but at the memory. Thomas approached slowly, kneeling in front of the child. "Listen closely," he said, voice low and firm. "Whoever they were, they haven't found this cabin. And as long as you're with me, they won't. But what if—" "They won't," Thomas repeated, with a certainty he didn't fully feel. The boy searched his face, trying to believe him. Rex placed a protective paw over the child's leg. And in that moment, Thomas understood something chilling. He wasn't just sheltering a lost boy. He was sheltering a target. A storm was coming, and not the kind that fell from the sky. The rest of the afternoon passed in a quiet tension that clung to the cabin like a thick fog. The boy stayed near Rex, rarely speaking unless Thomas gently coaxed him. Even then, his answers came in whispers, punctuated by long silences, as if every memory he tried to touch burned his fingers. Thomas pretended to go about his chores, chopping wood, boiling water, checking the fire, but his eyes kept drifting to window, scanning the tree line for the smallest hint of movement. The forest felt wrong, too watchful, too aware. As sunset bled across the sky, Thomas finally sat on the edge of the couch next to the boy. "How are you feeling?" The boy hesitated. "Warm, but scared." Rex placed his muzzle on the boy's knee, sensing the fear. The child stroked the dog's fur with shaking fingers. Thomas kept his voice steady. "Do you remember anything else? Anything that could help us?" The boy's breathing hitched. I heard them say something before I ran." Thomas leaned in. "What was it?" The boy squeezed his eyes shut as if pulling the memory from a locked place. One of them said, "We can't let him reach anyone." Thomas froze. "Reach anyone?" he repeated softly. "Reach who?" "I don't know," the boy whispered. "They said I knew something. Something I wasn't supposed to." Thomas's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a runaway or a lost child. This was something else, something deliberate. Before he could ask another question, Rex suddenly stiffened. The shepherd's ears shot up. His body leaned forward. Then he growled, low, deep, primal. Thomas's blood turned cold. Rex didn't growl like that unless the danger was real and near. "What is it, boy?" Thomas whispered, already rising to his feet. Rex limped to the window and stared into the darkening woods, hackles raised. Thomas grabbed his flashlight and stepped carefully onto the porch, closing the door halfway behind him. The air had shifted, colder, sharper, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. A twig snapped. Thomas swung his light toward the sound. At first, he saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then he noticed them. Boot prints, fresh ones, leading straight toward the cabin. Thomas's pulse exploded. Someone had been here. Someone who didn't care about hiding their presence. He scanned deeper. His flashlight caught movement between the trees. A figure, tall, still, watching him. Thomas felt every instinct in his body roar awake. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout. He simply stepped backward toward the door, never breaking eye contact with the shadow in the woods. The figure didn't move, didn't advance, just watched. Thomas reached behind him and slowly closed the door. The moment it latched, he bolted it with trembling hands. Rex barked sharply, as if confirming what Thomas already feared. "They're here," Thomas whispered. The boy curled deeper into the couch, fear widening his eyes. "They found me." Thomas knelt in front of him. "Listen to me. I won't let anything happen to you, but I need to know what they want." I don't know," the boy stammered. "I just know they're dangerous. They yelled my name once, or a name they called me, and said I saw something. Something important." Thomas swallowed hard, his mind racing. What did you see? The boy shook his head violently. I can't remember. It's all fog. Rex pressed against the boy protectively, growling toward the door. Thomas looked down at the old shepherd, tired, injured, but unshakably loyal. Then he looked at the boy, scared, lost, and holding secrets he didn't understand. Thomas stood slowly. Both of you, he said, voice firm, stay close to me. The boy's voice trembled. What do we do now? Thomas looked toward the window, where cold darkness pressed against the glass. We prepare, he said, because whoever is out there, they're not leaving without what they came for. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like a warning. Inside, 3 lives braced for the storm that was no longer weather, but human. The pounding on the door grew louder, harder, more desperate. Thomas held the dresser in place with every ounce of strength left in his aging body, but each impact shook the wood and rattled through his bones. The boy crouched behind the bed, arms wrapped tightly around Rex's neck. The old German shepherd stood between him and the door, trembling with exhaustion, yet refusing to back away. Thomas's breath came sharp and fast. Listen to me, he whispered to the boy. No matter what happens, you stay behind Rex. He won't let anything touch you. The boy shook his head violently. No, you can't. But the door gave another thunderous shake, splintering along the edges. There wasn't time for fear now, only choices. Thomas knelt beside the boy and cupped his face gently. You survived the storm. You survived the woods. You're going to survive this too. I swear it. The boy's eyes brimmed with tears. Don't leave us. I'm not leaving, Thomas said, and he meant it. Rex let out a sudden bark, fierce, loud, commanding, as if telling them both to be ready. Then the final blow struck. The makeshift barricade shattered inward. The intruder who stepped through had coldness in his posture, a deliberate, merciless calm. He lifted his weapon at the boy. Thomas lunged without thinking. No! But the man swung the gun toward the old ranger, finger tightening on the trigger, and that was when Rex moved. With a burst of strength no old dog should have had left, Rex threw himself between the boy and the barrel. His body collided with the intruder's arm, knocking the shot wide. The bullet tore into the wall as Rex growled, teeth bared, driving the man backward. Rex! The boy screamed. The intruder kicked the shepherd hard, sending him crashing into the dresser. The old dog collapsed with a painful thud, whimpering, but still tried to stand. Thomas tackled the intruder before he could fire again. The 2 men hit the floor in a violent struggle. The weapon skidded across the room. Thomas grabbed the attacker's coat, slammed him back, and struck him with every ounce of strength he had left. The man went still. Silence fell. Heavy, broken, terrible silence. Thomas scrambled to Rex. The old shepherd was lying on his side, chest rising unevenly. The boy fell to his knees, hands shaking violently as he tried to lift Rex's head. No, no, no. Rex, please. The boy's voice cracked into sobs. Thomas laid a trembling hand on the dog's fur. Rex, you brave boy. Rex's eyes fluttered open. Even through pain, they searched only for the boy, not the danger, not the man on the floor, not even Thomas. Just the boy. The child leaned closer. Don't go. Please don't go. Rex exhaled a slow, shuddering breath and pressed his nose weakly into the child's palm, a final gesture of love, devotion, and farewell. Thomas felt the moment the shepherd's body relaxed. A final breath, a final release. The boy screamed into Rex's fur as Thomas wrapped his arms around him, pulling him close. The cabin walls felt too small to hold all that grief. He saved you, Thomas whispered, voice breaking. He saved both of us. Outside, sirens finally echoed through the valley. Someone must have heard the gunshots. Help was coming. But it was too late for the dog who had given everything he had to protect a boy he barely knew, yet somehow loved completely. Hours later, when officers escorted them outside, the boy refused to leave until Rex's body was carried gently, wrapped in Thomas's old cabin blanket. They buried him beneath the tall pine at the edge of the clearing, the place Rex always rested during long summer afternoons. Thomas placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. He found you, he said softly, and he chose you. Tears streamed down the child's face. Why? Thomas smiled sadly. Because that's what old shepherds do. They find the ones who need the most, and they stay until their last breath. The boy wiped his eyes. What happens now? Thomas looked toward the horizon, where the forest began, where shadows ended, and where the future waited. You stay with me, he said. We'll figure the rest out together. The boy took his hand, and as they walked back to the cabin, Thomas whispered quietly, a promise carried on the cold winter air. Goodbye, Rex. Thank you for everything. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes loyalty can still save lives, even in the coldest corners of the world.